In the scorched deserts of ancient Peru, where the earth cracked like old bone and the sun blazed with merciless fury, there rose a city of clay and shadow, a city where gods demanded more than prayers. Here stood the Huaca de la Luna, the temple of the moon, its colossal adobe walls etched with faded murals of snarling beasts and skeletal warriors. To the untrained eye, these figures were art. To the Moche, they were prophecy. On this day, the temple would drink again. The prisoners stumbled across the dry earth, their ankles bound with twisted reeds, their backs striped with wounds. Their blood had already begun to darken the sand, marking the trail to their doom. Warriors of the Moche, painted in ochre and black, dragged them forward with hands hardened by years of conquest. Above them, the priests stood upon the temple steps, faces hidden behind grotesque masks of copper and bone, their feathered headdresses trembling in the desert wind. One priest carried a blade of hammered gold, its edge flashing like sunlight on water. He raised it to the sky as the drums began, their hollow beat echoing across the valley like the heart of some ancient beast. The prisoners were forced to kneel on the blood-stained stones before the altar. The stench of iron and death clung to the air, mingling with the bitter smoke of burning herbs. Somewhere, a conch shell wailed, a sound that was neither human nor divine, but something in between. And then, the chanting began. Low at first, a murmur in the bones of the earth. It rose and swelled until the very walls of the temple seemed to hum with power. The gods were listening. One by one, the captives were dragged forward. There was no mercy, no pause for prayer. The first man's throat opened under the golden blade, his blood spilling down the stone steps like a crimson river. The priests dipped their hands in it, smearing their faces as if painting themselves into the skin of the gods. The drums quickened, the sun burned hotter, and in the heart of the temple, the earth drank deeply. The altar was slick now, glistening in the desert sun like molten obsidian. Blood had filled the carved channels in the stone, trickling down to a basin where it frothed and steamed in the heat. The air throbbed with the pounding of drums, each beat a summons to powers that slumbered beneath the earth. The priests moved with deliberate grace, their bodies painted in crimson spirals and jagged black lines. They spoke in a tongue older than the adobe bricks beneath their feet, an invocation carried on the hot wind to ears unseen. Their masks hid all trace of humanity. Hollow eyes, fanged mouths, copper jaws that gleamed like the teeth of predators. The next captive was brought forward, a boy, barely grown, his ribs sharp under sunburnt skin. His face was a frozen mask of terror, but his voice had broken long ago. The warriors forced him to his knees, pressing his head down on the altar. His tears pooled in the blood of those who had gone before. The golden blade descended without hesitation. There was no cry, only a wet gasp as his lifeblood spilled across the stone, mingling with the sacred herbs burning in clay vessels. The priests caught the blood in ceramic cups, lifting them to the sky before drinking deeply, their mouths painted red with divinity. High above, vultures circled the temple. They knew this song well. Behind the altar, more captives waited, 30 men, their faces streaked with ash and despair. Some prayed, some wept. Others simply stared at the horizon where the desert swallowed the sky, knowing that the sun would set without them. The drums grew louder, faster. The gods were not yet satisfied. Beyond the altar lay a passage choked with incense smoke, its walls pulsing with crimson light from flickering torches. The priests dragged the next captives inside, their feet smearing blood across the packed earth floor. The air here was thick, sweet with burning resin, foul with the stench of death. The walls themselves seemed alive. Vast murals covered every inch, faded but fierce, snarling fanged creatures, warriors gutting their enemies, rivers of scarlet winding through fields of skulls. Their colors, ochre, vermilion, and jet, still burned in the dim light, whispering stories of gods who devoured men. At the far end stood the inner chamber, the heart of the Huaca de la Luna. Here, the sacrifices were not for the eyes of the crowd. Here, offerings were made in silence, beneath the painted gaze of Ayapec, the decapitator god. His image loomed on the wall, a monstrous figure with spider limbs and a mouth full of jagged teeth, clutching a severed head in each clawed hand. The torches made his eyes flicker as if alive. The captives were thrown to the ground before the idol. They trembled as the priests advanced, their copper masks glinting in the torchlight. The chief priest carried a bundle of obsidian blades, each one sharper than glass. He knelt, slicing open the belly of the first man with surgical precision, hands disappearing into the crimson cavity. Steam rose in the cold air as he tore free the heart, still beating, and raised it to the mural. A hush fell, even the drums outside ceased. The priest pressed the heart against the painted mouth of Ayapec, smearing blood across its teeth. Then, with slow, deliberate reverence, he sank his own teeth into the organ, tearing it in half. The other priests followed, passing it like bread among them, their faces slick with gore. Outside, the vultures screamed. The chamber reeked of copper and smoke. Blood coursed through narrow channels carved into the floor, flowing like veins toward a pit at the center of the room. There, the earth gaped wide, a black maw lined with jagged stones, as though the temple itself hungered. The priests knelt around the pit, their voices rising in a droning chant that made the walls tremble. Outside, the sun had begun to die, sinking into a haze of dust and heat. But inside the Huaca, the air grew colder with every heartbeat offered to the gods. The captives were dragged forward one by one, their faces pale, their bodies limp with terror. No screams now, only silence, broken by the wet sound of knives slicing flesh. The last offering was different. A warrior, broad-shouldered and defiant even as they bound his limbs. He spat blood in the priest's face, a curse in his eyes. The high priest laughed, a hollow sound, and drove the obsidian blade deep into the man's chest, twisting until the ribs cracked like dry twigs. He wrenched free the heart and hurled it into the pit. For a moment, nothing moved. The chanting stopped. Even the flames seemed to hesitate. Then the earth shuddered. Dust sifted down from the ceiling as a deep groan rolled through the stones, a sound older than men, older than time. The pit swallowed the heart with a wet, sucking noise, and the blood in the channels quivered as if alive. The priests fell prostrate, pressing their faces to the floor, their bodies shaking with ecstasy and dread. Outside, thunder rumbled over the desert, though no clouds marked the sky. When the warrior's heart vanished into the black maw of the pit, the temple fell silent. The last echoes of the chant hung in the air like smoke, thin, fragile, ready to break. Then came the sound, low at first, like the growl of something vast stirring in its sleep. The stone beneath the priests quivered, cracks spidering across the blood-slick floor. Outside, the sky dimmed, not with nightfall, but with a sudden veil of shadow sweeping across the sun. The desert wind rose in a shrill, keening cry that tore through the valley, carrying with it the stench of blood and burning resin. Vultures wheeled wildly, their black wings thrashing against a wind that seemed to come from every direction at once. The crowd at the base of the pyramid scattered. Warriors who had stood like statues now broke ranks, scrambling over each other as the sand lashed their faces. Mothers clutched their children and fled. But there was no refuge from the storm that bloomed without clouds. Lightning ripped the sky apart, a single blinding vein of white fire striking the peak of the Huaca. The thunder that followed was not sound but force, a shudder that buckled the knees of men and sent chunks of adobe tumbling from the temple walls. Above the pyramid, something dark coiled in the roiling dusk, not a bird, not a cloud, a shape vast and writhing like a serpent made of night. Its body curled upon itself, twisting in patterns that defied the eye, and from deep within it came a pulse, a rhythm that matched the drums that had ceased moments before, as if they had called it here. The priests remained kneeling, faces pressed to the ground, their voices trembling prayers now, not songs. They had fed the earth with blood, and now the gods had come to drink the sky.
The heavens split open with a roar that swallowed all sound. The pyramid shook like a dying beast as torrents of rain lashed the adobe bricks, turning steps into rivers of red. Blood and water mingled, coursing down in thick streams that painted the desert floor scarlet. The crowd was gone scattered like chaff in the wind, leaving only corpses and remnants of banners flapping like torn skin. Vultures, driven mad by the scent, clawed at the dead even as the storm ripped them from the earth. The priests clung to the crumbling altar, their copper masks glinting in the electric gloom. They had given everything hearts, blood, screams, and the gods had answered above them. The sky writhed. In a chaos of shadow and fire, the serpent shape was gone, or perhaps it had sunk into the storm. Itself, its coils twisting unseen among the clouds. Then came the final sound of cracking like dry bones snapping underfoot, but vast, endless. The peak of the Huaca split wide, vomiting the geyser of steam and molten earth into the black sky. Fire rained down in sheets, hissing where it struck the blood-soaked sand. The priests did not flee. They raised their arms, screaming praises as the storm swallowed them whole. And then silence. The storm passed as swiftly as it had come, leaving only ruin. The temple stood broken, its murals melted into grotesque smears of color. The pit where hearts had been fed gaped wider now, as though something vast had crawled out to walk beneath the stars. By dawn, the desert lay still, the only sound the rasp of vultures tearing flesh. The gods had drunk their fill, but their hunger was eternal.